Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hurt. In this video, I think this actually might complete our run of looking at all of Tal's goodies, at least until he releases another one. We're looking at Tal Vocoder 2. Now, this one has been around for some time, and it creates some downsides, but overall it does what it says it's going to do on the box, which is quite consistent with Tal and, well, what Tal does. Yes, you've probably all seen Tal's website, so no need to make a lot of it, but Tal Vocoder, it's one of his freebies. As I've said, it is older and does show some limits for that, but good vocoders are kind of hard to come by. There are a lot of vocoders. I've done reviews on several vocoders, and clearly my favorite out of the whole lot was Reason's BVX, because not only did it sound good, but it was way easier to use than most. This is free, so it's not fair to compare to a $100 product, bearing in mind you might have to buy Reason to run it. But I think it stands up on its own pretty well. So, yes, website, says what it'll do, says how it works, blah, 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 blah. Go have a look at it, go try it. We don't need to mess about with that side much more. Now, I've put together a demo piece. Before we get into this, though, I sadly have to raise something that somebody said something truly abominable and knew that what he was saying was wrong, because he presaged it by saying, "Oh, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm about to be extremely expletive deleted rude." If you don't like the pieces that I work with in these reviews, send your own. If you want me to work with better stuff, send me stuff. I've put that call out quite a few times. Do you know how many people have approached us? 0. That's okay. I am a mix engineer by trade. Yes, I do compose, but I compose what I do, and being a mix engineer and a record producer, I don't necessarily write personal music that's exactly like what you dig, especially if you only dig trapcore hop something or other, which I really couldn't give a flying banana peel about. So it's really important, A, to be polite, and B, to have things in context. If I've thrown something together in an hour or so, and normally it takes way more time than that, then it's not going to be good. I've never said it was going to be good. All it needs to do is to represent, to display the functions, the features, the thing I'm talking about. If you need to be rude about it, all that kind of says is this, especially if I go have a look at who you are to justify such an arrogant display and discover you have nothing to show at all. So I'm back to this. Yes, this work is, at best, poor. I sing out of tune. I always have. It'd be nice if I didn't, but I always have. But oddly enough, that wasn't necessarily the reason I didn't get record contracts back in the 90s. Go figure. So, yeah, this just is. It's only here because it allows me to do my real job, which here is to show you what this thing does and doesn't do. So, a little demo fragment.
You sing for me.
Can you sing for me?
Can you sing along?
Can you sing along?
Are there eyes in your face?
Are there eyes in your face?
Will the night be given?
Can you give me the night?
But very, very simple. I actually roped in my 16-year-old to do the second vocal part, because there really was no sense in having a second vocal part that was exactly the same. She followed my lack of being in tune, and no, there was no sense auto-tuning it, A, because it doesn't actually make it sound any better, it just sounds even weirder, and B, we're going to vocode it. So, let's break this down. First thing we can do is pull out the kick, because the kick is only there just to make it come
Sing
all together.
for me.
Let's mute these vocals and see how the piece is put together. Then we'll turn off the vocoders, because everything in this has a vocoder to some extent. That doesn't sound the same, does it? No. We actually started with this, which is a preset that I just grabbed. It's got, I think, 6 or 8 different slices of things. So each slice actually plays something a bit different, which sounds like this. I just took it because it's interesting. And then I vocoded it. So I fed it notes from the sequencer, which will be here. There are the notes that are triggering the actual synth, and these are the notes that are triggering the vocoder. So that completely overrides any and all of the tuning that was there in the original patch. This is something that vocoders do, and they're very, very good at it, and one of their real charms. Of course, it is their greatest weakness as well, but if we use that carefully, we can create a pretty darn interesting sound. A few attempts to control the levels because they can get a little too exciting at times, but this is the nature of vocoding, and the more the vocoding is what we might call authentic, like original style vocoding, then the more it will tend to just kind of leap around. So Tal's kind of gotten that part right. We've then got this pulse synth, which we'll just pop in solo for the moment. So it's just some chords with a quacky sort of a brass type sound. That's put through a vocoder, whereas this first one uses the onboard synth in Tal's vocoder. This uses an external synth and flies that in to control, and so the vocoding's done ignoring Tal's synth engine. And here how that gives us kind of a modulation kind of a quality, because what's happening is we've got the tuning of the original, the tuning of the other, and they have to kind of work together. What happens with vocoders is basically they look at the two together, they keep what is common and dismiss everything else, which is why they automatically put the original signal, the donor signal, into the tuning of the key, which is the other signal. So that's cool. And then these drums. One of my own kits. And this is not being fed. Actually, no, I do lie. It is being fed some notes. And to be honest, I have found this a tiny bit erratic at times, that the drums sometimes are working and sometimes not. So I don't know whether this is a bug or a failure on my side to understand, but most of the time they run all the time. But they were also set up that they would just trigger sometimes. And they're drums, but they're also fed a single line. So they also become more like a bass line. Vocoding drums is kind of pointless if you are trying to make them still sound like drums, but really quite cool if you're looking to do a kooky kind of a bass line. So within the piece, they're actually creating this sort of bass line. It's a shame that they seem inconsistent, in the sense that they seem to run all the time, most of the time, but then sometimes they follow the MIDI, and I don't know what's happening there. But this is one of the issues with pretty well all vocoders, that it's very easy to have them not behave the way you think they should behave. So I'm not going to say all it sucks because of that, but it is a thing. Most things behave very consistently, but whatever I did here is not consistent. The fact that it's moving around, well, I don't know. But nonetheless, you get the idea that it's taking this drum sound and delivering us this kind of kooky cool type of bass line. So I put that together with a straight drum sound just to help pin it down. We've now got a piece that's built entirely with vocoders. I would not advise this as a wise strategy because the sound of vocoders is such a strong thing that once you have more than one or two, or generally more than one, in a mix at a given point of time, it just overdoes it. So it's otherwise it's like having 47 different drummers playing 47 different drum lines all at once. You might feel very clever and get yourself on a TikTok video, but your music will sound like garbage as a result. So what I have done is bound to fail, but I wanted to show off different methods, and we've done that. There is then the vocal line. Now it's primarily clear at the moment, and then the backing part, but also primarily clear.
Can you sing along?
So that's
Are
dry.
there eyes in your face?
And that's fully vocoded. Now you can hear that great tendency towards distortion. Exactly where that comes from, I'm not sure. It may be that one or both of the inputs are overdriving and it's distorting as a result of that, but vocoders are just prone to doing this. From what I could gather, it seemed to be more from output, but also just the fact that they distort. This is old code, and older vocoders, as I say, were prone to doing that. This sort of works better when we have a sort of a mix.
Can you sing for me?
But bear in mind that the melody that I'm singing and the melody that I've told the vocoder to make me sing in aren't really the same. Therefore, they can be a little off with each other, quite apart from the fact that I am completely off with myself. I did ask Reason to extract notes to MIDI, and with my part they were just... which I always find to be the case because I have an intriguing approach to tune. But it is...
Sing for me.
Can you sing along?
in the right situation.
Can you sing along?
If I didn't have a fully vocoded backing, then I might look at making a set of mixes like this that has a balance of clear vocal and vocoder. When we go back and listen to the era of vocoders, which was particularly late 70s, early 80s, Give Me the Night, All Night, and through into the mid 80s, Eyes Without a Face, Les Yeux Sans Visage, all that vocoded stuff was often a combination of original and the vocode. So
Are
somewhere,
there eyes in your face?
because as you hear, diction here is essentially all but gone. Only a dedicated listener of vocoder is going to be able to find what the words are. Whereas here, we get both.
Give me the night.
Obviously, if the singer is in tune and singing the same melody as the key, which is the synth playing, then you will find that they tend to be meshing much better than they do here. That's not the fault of Tal's vocoder, it's just the nature of the beast. If everybody's doing the same stuff and in tune, then we will be meshing far nicer. But because we've got a fully vocoded mix on this side and vocoding here, it's just too much. All we've got is everything with that aggressive, graty, vocody kind of sounds.
Can you sing for me?
Can you sing for me?
So mix engineer's notes would be
Sing along.
seeing you've got a fully vocoded backing, then give a fully clean vocal so that becomes a contrast to the mechanical nature. If this sounded okay on its own, which it doesn't because it relies entirely on vocoding to sound right, although if we kill off, if we bypass that one, kill that one, and bypass that one,
Can you sing along?
the mix is not good.
Other eyes in your face.
While their eyes in your face.
Will the night begin?
You hear that works better, even though it's a bit of a mess. So please be very careful as to how much you vocode. It's a slippery slope because once you get into it, you're like, cool. And you might want to vocode everything, but generally you want to vocode one part. Otherwise, they will all fight with each other. So that's our piece. We'll now run through the good and bad because we've actually seen this in action. Okay, what's good? It's got a classic vocode sound. It has some good routing options, which we will look at in a moment, and it is, of course, free. Many paid vocoders, if you look at the comparison that I did after doing the BVX review, you'd see that most of them really weren't the equal of the BVX. That was $100. They ranged from, I think it was 30 to 150, but didn't necessarily deliver much as good. There have been quite a few vocoders, but very few that, in terms of VST, very few that really deliver nicely and easily. Getting the vocoder sound is only a part of that game. So it's free and it works pretty darn well for the price and its age. The bad, there are some limits here, but it's free and it's old. It's a bit hard to set up, but in all fairness, guess what? All vocoders are a bit hard to set up. They are, in many ways, a bit like sidechaining. So people have difficulties with the whole ducking thing, because there's no such thing as sidechaining. Ducking means that we pull in a signal from one place, a key, to enact something on another. So if you're wanting to do the kind of thing, the Tiesto or whoever did it first, thing that Retroblaze does so that everything sounds like it's falling in a hole every time the kick drum goes, then you're pulling in a sound from one place to affect another thing to affect the third thing. And vocoding is really essentially the same. We're putting together two signals. So we have to work out how to get the two signals to come together. And it's the third object that, as I said, says, okay, what's in common with these? We'll keep that. What's not in common with these? We'll just throw it away. So, yeah, it's a bit hard to set up. You've got to take your time with it, but all vocoders are hard to set up. So it's no great punishment on this. There is no vocal balance. You see that to balance the vocals here with the vocode, I've had to set up my own wiring. There is no internal knob to say, let's bring in the original raw signal so that we can balance it. That, I think, is a little bit of an omission, but with most DAWs having some kind of fancier setup, if you know how to wire, if you know how to route, which honestly you should before you try to call yourself a mix engineer, then you should be able to come up with some way to do that, even if it's running parallel tracks. Diction is poor, but then diction is poor on all older vocoders, and it is quite distorty. But again, all old vocoders were pretty darn distorty. So you've just got to learn to use the beast with the nature of the beast rather than fighting against it. Some of that distorty stuff actually lends a huge amount of character. That was what I really had to balance with this, and because I knew it had to work in the mix, I pulled back some of the distortion. If it was the only vocoded sound in the mix, I would have actually allowed it to have a lot more distortion because it provides this tremendous kind of character. It keeps drawing attention to itself with the distortion, which you will hear in true vocoding, particularly through the 70s, that there's quite a lot of distortion in it. But that's just part of the charm of the device, but this one will be noisier than the modern ones. But bear in mind, most of the modern ones don't really sound like real vocoders anyway. You're not going to get a real "the are the robots" out of them. They're just going to sound like kooky auto-tune. So this sounds like a real vocoder. There's no real downsides here, just natures of said beast. Let's pull it open and have a bit of a look. We will take our drum line because it's the easiest to just play with. This is the device itself. I know it's taken me a while to get here. We've got a couple of basic parts. It all works on routing. There are various different ways to route this, and you need to understand them. There is some help in the manual, but you need to be taking your time to understand it. If you don't understand it, don't go online saying to people, "How do I do this?" It won't work. It will work. It really will work. But you've got to take your time to understand it. Get in there, get a piece of paper and a pen and draw things out as to what they should be, and then make a match in your system. If they don't match, it probably just means that you are assuming, and we all know what assuming does to you and me, and that just makes you feel foolish. So really take your time, understand how routing works. If your routing hasn't worked, it merely means you're not understanding the routing. You're not thinking of every point in the chain. You're just going, "Oh, well, it should work because I want it to." And that's like me saying, "Banana. Banana? Where's my banana?" Because, you know what, I actually have to walk to the fridge, go, "Is there a banana?" Nope. Okay, I better go to the car, get myself a banana by going to the shop. We have to learn how to actually think in tremendous detail. What are all the steps I've got to take to get from wanting a banana to getting a banana in my hand? That's routing, and that's part of your job if you're choosing to do it. If you're choosing not to do it, who cares? Not your problem. You set up the things as they need to be, and then you hire an expert who is good at routing by nature. So you've got your inputs. Now, there's a carrier or the key, which is an inbuilt synth. You can use that. If you're not calling a synth from anywhere else, then this is what will happen. You can assign it some notes, some MIDI from your controller. See, notes coming in here, and they will define what gets played. So that's how that bit works. I'm not going to show you in detail because then you'll start to come to me going, but every door is going to look a little bit different. The mindset is what we're discussing here, and more to the point, the product, it works. So we can control the synth that's inbuilt simply by assigning MIDI to it. And we can obviously assign it MIDI notes in our sequencer, as you saw before. As I say, in this particular instance, there's something weird that it doesn't always respond the way, at least I think that it could, should, would. I had it doing exactly what you hear now, which is just permanently on, and then I opened the project up and it wasn't coming on at all. And so, okay, that's interesting. So I gave it notes, separated out, and that allowed the performance to turn on and off, which actually made the piece sound an awful lot cooler. But now when I open it again, it just plays all the time. For the moment, we'll call it user error. It may be a bug. Who knows? It may be a thing that happens in Reason and doesn't happen elsewhere. So we can route by using the onboard synth and sending it MIDI. Then we've got a couple of other options. The most common use will be to call a sidechain. And calling a sidechain is where we feed it a completely different instrument. So if we pop that one out of solo, pop this one in solo, turn it on, we've got that going, which is these. And as you see, notes are coming in here. So we've got the sidechain on. So what we're telling it is that we want you to listen to the audio inputs which are called sidechain. So I feed it the audio out of this synth into the sidechain input. Ignore all other wiring. You're just going, well, I've got the original signal. We might call that the voice. If we were looking to do robot voices, we'd put the voice in here. We'd send that out to wherever it's got to go next. And then we would have our secondary instrument and feed that into the sidechain whilst pressing the sidechain button. That is going to give you the most versatile vocoder because we can make any sound that we want. We can use the key can be samples. It can be absolutely anything. Bear in mind, of course, that vocoding is a rather blunt instrument, so it's not going to allow you to fully have yourself talking as though you are Donald Trump or something like that. It doesn't really work that way. But you could get interesting results. So that's the sidechain option, where you're going to feed it with another synth. Or the other option that was used, actually it's not used here. The other option is that you can use the pair of inputs, the main inputs, nothing in your sidechain or anything, and then have them vocode against each other. This is I don't know whether hardware vocoders did this or not. They may well have. But it definitely was kind of the default in the early days of plugins because there wasn't multiple inputs and all kinds of stuff like that. It was a bit yuck. And so often you'd have the left hand signal be the carrier and the right hand as your key or modulator. And so to set it up, you would often have to route two channels to one, panning to the left and the right, and then they would turn together to give you the output that you want. It does work. I did set up an earlier project when I was first playing with it. Yes, I had a voice on one side and the key on the other, the synth on the other, put them into a bus, put this in the middle of the bus, like in the bus insert, and bingo, I had vocoding like it was this method, or the other method, this one here, with the sidechain. It's just coming in this way is, well, it's a bit ugly. Oh, with sidechain, you need to press that too. So you need to say input mode, which turns off this, and sidechain. Otherwise, if you wanted to vocode against essentially itself,
Are there eyes in your face?
then hear how that's picking at itself. So it sounds more drummy, but certain things get really loud, like the I don't know what that is, cowbelly type thing gets very pointy because it's vocoding against itself. It can be interesting to vocode against yourself, but it doesn't achieve you an awful lot other than big peaks and troughs, more peaks than troughs. So the input methods are basically three. One is have only one input, which is your, we'll call voice, and then use the onboard synth, feed notes to vocoder via MIDI, and you're off. The second one is that you can press input, but you need to have your your carrier and your modulator both in the same input, in the same stereo input, hard panned left and right. If there's some crossover in the middle, you will lose true vocoding. It's a bit of an ugly way. Otherwise, the best way, if you want the most control, is to press input mode, press sidechain, get a completely different synthesizer, and feed its output to the sidechain input on the back of this, however your DAW handles that kind of routing. If you have a DAW that doesn't handle that kind of routing, well, I don't know what to do, but you probably get yourself a workspace. Cushview Element, I think it's a couple of bucks, or Blue Cat have a really good environment, as does someone else. You spend a bit of money on those, but they are significantly better than Element. But Element is only a couple of bucks, and it does work. It's just a little clunky. So there are your 3 ways to get sand into this chap. It then comes down to the synth. You've got a pair of oscillators and a noise source. So it defaults to Sawtooth because it has the most harmonics, therefore is the richest signal. You've also got a pulse wave, which it's a square, so it's going to sound a bit empty because half your harmonics are missing. There is a sub. So you can be making things sound thicker. And a noise oscillator. If you watch the past videos, particularly the BVX, we go through talking about how noise helps clarify. I didn't find it helped clarify diction in this anywhere near as much as in some others, but this is a very old vocoder with very old code. Its method is going to be a lot coarser or rougher, thank you, than more modern pieces of software. But basically, you mix as you want to get the sound that you want. You can sync your oscillators together so that if they're out of tune with each other, you can pull them together. It gives you a harder, sharper sort of a sound, and then detuning and what have you. There's a poly mode, which I didn't fully understand. With Portamento, maybe. Oh, okay, Portamento only works in mono mode. Fair enough. And then you've got tuning. It's just octave. If you want that funny anemic sort of sound, go with a high tuning. If you want it to be more cyborgy, by your command, then you go to a low tuning. And then you can detune the whole device. Double click resets everything. That's your synth. It's really very, very simple. The oscillators are fine. They're TAL oscillators. They are fine. You've then got the vocoder section itself. And the vocoder section itself is your bands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Slightly unusual number. I didn't actually count them before. I didn't even think. 11's a reasonable number of bands. Normally it's 4, 8, 12, 16, that sort of thing. 11's an odd number, as I say, but it really doesn't matter. What happens is the signal comes in, it gets split into X number of bands, in this case 11, and then the decision is made at each band as to keep, reject, which means a lot is rejected, especially if you have a small number of bands. The more number of bands you have, then the better it is. And this was done with a slow Fourier transform. I think most modern ones are done with a fast, hence they're being more accurate, but a little less classic vocodery at the same time. So you can set the levels of each of the bands. If you want it to seem a bit more oomphy, turn up the low end. But understand that this is not a graphic EQ. It is the level of each of the bands. Therefore, you'll get some very odd results as you change levels. So, see, that's the band that's picking up most of that. I don't know what it is. Cowbelly kind of sound. So if you are having it being a little too much on something, too much distortion or whatever, then you can change your bands. It just allows you to mess with the tonal timbre of what comes out a little bit. There is the S volume. It detects sibilants. He's written S sounds, sibilants. It detects sibilants, and it's useful in theory for voice settings, as in it mixes the sibilants back in. So he's got a mix knob. The trouble is it only mixes the sibilants back in, not the whole original modulator, so not the whole original vocal. You see that here I had to do it by hand with routing. Would be nice to have another knob to do that. I don't know whether there are plans to ever update this or not. If not, no biggie, it's free. Vocoders are not that popular. I know there was a fashion for them about 12 seconds ago, but that died out about 11 seconds ago. I didn't notice any particular difference with this at all, but it's not going to do any harm one way or another. This one controls the release time of the envelope follower. Okay, the way that the vocoder applies these two sounds is using an envelope follower. Envelope followers are what we use in compressors and various other things to work out ups and downs of levels. So if we have a short release, we get a quite sort of detailed sound, as in there's no wash. If we extend that, then we get quite a lot of wash. And that can really sound good if you're wanting your vocode, especially on vocal, to seem to have a more choir-like sound. So for something very percussive, you're going to want to go short. But for something that you want to sound longer and actually more cool and robot-y, then increase your release. Harmonic. He says it's like an overdrive kind of thing, that it creates more upper harmonics. It is subtle. Vocoding can suffer from being muddy, but this one suffers more from the opposite of being too bright. So just see what happens. Some cases I felt like it didn't do much of anything. In other cases it was like, oh, that's a little bit nicer. But if you're looking for harmonic enhancement with saturators and stuff, you're probably better doing it after the fact outboard, but it's built in, no argument from me one way or another. And then, of course, a final overall volume, which is good, because these things, as I keep saying, can get pretty darn loud, or actually be quite the opposite and just be ridiculously, stupidly low. So he gives you quite a lot of throw. Doesn't show dBs or anything between turning it right down or boosting the whole thing right up. Fair enough. Makes the knob a little less in terms of finesse, but it's the right thing to have. And if you need more finesse, then you should have that on your mixing desk, or put another plug-in that handles levels before, after, wherever you need it. We've covered the input modes. There is also a chorus. No doubt related in some way to his Juno chorus thingy. Vocoders do, generally speaking, sound an awful lot nicer when you put a chorus on them. So he's built that in. Okay, great. It does sound good. My only concern with that is it's the one sound. So I used it a lot less here because I was being silly enough to make a whole mix out of vocoders, and if they all had the same chorus sound on them, then it even more made them all sound like they were the same as each other, and that just didn't help matters at all. So it was better to turn them off, clarify, and where I wanted to use things, simply to add it in after the fact. But it is there, and it's nice that it is there, because if nothing else, you can flick it in and out and go, yeah, I like where that's going, but I don't like where it's landed. That tells me I want to get a more detailed chorus. So cool, it's a nice enough feature. It costs us nothing to have that there. It costs us nothing to have the whole device. That's really all of your features. And then again, it just is a case of how you choose to put things together and what you put against everything else, and making sure that if you're vocoding with a sense of purpose and overview. So if you listen to those songs like George Benson's Give Me the Night, or Billy Idol's Eyes Without a Face, then the vocoding sounds superb. Video Killed the Radio Star, I'm pretty sure there's vocoding in that too. But it sounds superb and it's so ultra cool because it's not overdone. And that makes it seem bigger and more exciting because it's not overdone. It's very, very easy to overdo it. And this mix is nothing but overdone vocoding. You hear where I try to have... It just doesn't work. But if I pull out the music, bearing in mind our levels and what have you are a little bit dubious, it works better. So just don't overdo vocoding as I've done here. You can find a place in which you can get it all balanced.
Eyes in your face.
Are there eyes in your face?
Will the night be given?
Can you give me the night?
Yes, that's why those two lines are there. I had to come up with something, and I was like, well, I have to name drop some of the coolest moments in vocoding. That's really it. It's not a simple device to use because vocoders never are. But once you understand what you're trying to do and actually really logically work it out, rather than just going, it doesn't work, and having a cow about it, which gets you nowhere, go back to basics. What do I need to do? What needs to go where? If you don't understand it, then go back to the manual and go back to the understanding of what needs to go where. If you don't understand it, it'll fail every time. You will find that you get there, and then it will make sense, with the possible exception of whatever I've got happening with these drums. It's not happening in other instances, but it's just happening there. Don't really know why. But you will just find vocoders as such are a little bulky. That's the nature of the beast. But it's free. It does have a nice old-fashioned vocoder kind of sound. If you're after the sound of auto-tune, get auto-tune. I'm not sure that it's a good plan, but most auto-tunes also have a way of feeding them MIDI, in which case it becomes a sort of vocoder. It's not a vocoder, but the Cher effect is from having Cher sing along and then having somebody feed MIDI, which I believe is just using auto-tune as a similar to a vocoder, which is why initially many of us thought it was a vocoder. And I know that Neptune in here, if I feed it MIDI and sing along, then it gives me a very cool voice synthesizer kind of thing. But that's not vocoding. This is vocoding. This sounds like a vocoder and it behaves like a vocoder with all the ups and downs thereof. Okay, that's it. Have fun, play with the device. My name's Benedict for Higher Hertz. If you have any questions, not about how do I write this, that's just not cool to ask after I've covered all of this here, then watch the video. But if you have questions, hit subscribe, ask them on down below with manners, or you will find yourself at best deleted, or at worst we might well decide to actually make fools of you, make an example of you. And I was actually sorely tempted to take and very directly point out the person and their ill manners because they did it in public. So what you set up, what you start, will come to chase you. And if you say, oh, but that's not professional to do that, well, it's not professional to be an arse in the first place, in which case gloves come off because you're no longer playing the professional game. So ask away, play with the vocoder if the vocoder interests you. If it doesn't, no loss. At least you know a little bit about vocoders now. Get out there. Have a fun day.